tonight, we have our very special guest, Karen Bardsley, who we'll introduce in just a moment. My name is Diego Valdez. I am the director at the Sports Business Institute Barcelona. And tonight we are presenting this webinar in partnership with VSI. VSI are our partners for our certificate in football business management. But as I said, tonight we have the very special honor of having Karen Bardsley. We're going to turn it over to her in just a moment because we're very keen to hear from her tonight. Before that, however, I'd just like to do a couple of housekeeping details and run a quick sound test. So if you can hear me, I just asked you to, in the chat box, to type in OK. And also, as if you've attended some of our webinars, we'd like to hear where you're connecting from. So tell us the city or the country where you're connecting from. And we'd love to hear if, first of all, that the sound is coming through okay. And secondly, from where you're connecting from. So we have okay from Nottingham. Yes, okay, says Sarah. We also have Jose. Excellent. Christina says okay. Perfect. Marco, okay, from Indonesia. Carlos from Madrid. Excellent. Andrew from London. Crystal from Luton. Xavi from Barcelona. Excellent. Okay, so then the chat box is exploding with sound check okay, so it's great to have everybody connecting tonight. What I'll do now is I'll briefly run through the structure of how we're going to run the webinar tonight. As I mentioned at the outset, we're going to have our very special guest, Karen, who will talk to us a little bit more about the growth of women's football and also understanding the mindset of a winner. So we'll very much enjoy speaking to her about this. After that, we're going to briefly give an overview on the certificate program that I mentioned before, the Football Business and Management Certificate program that we run in partnership with VSI. And then we're going to turn it over for a Q&A session where you can ask questions to Karen, and you'll have an opportunity to ask your particular questions. At this point, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Tony. Tony is the co-program director of the certificate program, and he's representing VSI, who will introduce himself and will also introduce our guest for tonight. So Tony, over to you.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us on this webinar this evening. Looking forward to hearing what Karen has to say about her career to date, not only as a footballer, but Karen is, from my perspective, someone that I've got to know over the years who is very interested in her own personal development, and is looking towards how that will career on after she finishes playing football. So just a very brief introduction to Karen. Karen is American born, resides over in England now. She obviously plays for Manchester City and has been there for a couple of years in what is a successful ladies team there. And prior to coming on air, Karen, Diego and myself were talking about the growth of the ladies team for Manchester City and the profile that the team has now in the standing of global football. Karen is also an England international. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Karen, but you've got about 70 odd caps.
Yeah, that's about right. I think it's about 70.
Okay. Good.
So, yeah.
So very experienced in that space, playing in a number of major international tournaments. So with regards to that, what I'd like to do is position the first question to Karen. She can obviously give an introduction to herself at this point as well, but leading into the first question, Karen, it'd be nice to just give us a little bit of insight into who you are, and then to tell us a little bit about your journey to date, and what has been that path to success.
Well, firstly, big thanks to Diego and yourself, Tony, for having me tonight. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to connect with everyone and kind of share my story and, how I got to where I am today. So, basically, I grew up in Southern California. My parents are English, and they moved over there about 30, 40 some odd years ago. And, I had the great fortune of growing up in a country where young girls are encouraged to be active and play sports, and football is one thing in particular that's greatly encouraged. So I was off to a great start, being able to just run around and follow my passion and play with my friends. So I was very fortunate in that regard, and just basically found out that I really enjoyed football. I was good at it. I was much better at, goalkeeping than I was maybe anything else. So in a sense, it kind of found me, but quickly realized that there was, a bit of a future in women's football at the time. If you wanted to get an education, you could definitely get a scholarship to go to university and have that paid for you. So at the time, besides playing for the national team, that was essentially the highest stage you could reach in terms of your playing career. So that was something that I think I certainly strived for when I realized that that was something that could happen. And I think still to this day, that's something that a lot of young girls strive for, especially their parents. They really hope that maybe they can get a scholarship to a top university in the States. So that's kind of, I started playing for a club called SoCal Blues in South Orange County in Southern California, and got a Division I scholarship to Cal State University Fullerton. And throughout that time, women's professional soccer had just come onto the scene off the back of a failed league called the WUSA. And I really wanted to be a part of it. So I had to wait until about 2008 for that draft to come around. So in the meantime, I was playing semi-professionally for a club called Ajax America in Los Angeles. I got drafted to Sky Blue in New Jersey, in the picture that you see below. And I had a great career there from about 2009 to about 2011 or 12, when unfortunately the league collapsed. So it was definitely following a trend of professional women's soccer in the States, where it just wasn't financially sustainable or viable. So it became pretty difficult, and everyone who was a part of it, it was a pretty transient workforce. So we were just kind of going wherever we could play, but then also make a little bit of money. But it was time to move on after 2011. So it took me to Europe. It took me to Sweden first. And then after a few years in Sweden, I came back to England, where I signed for a club called Lincoln Ladies. And unfortunately, that team wasn't really headed in the direction that I wanted to go in. And I had the good fortune of joining Manchester City in 2014. And throughout that time in university, I was in and out of the England squad, but I didn't really kind of cement my place until about 2009. And continued to play through the World Cup, the European Championships, the Olympics, and most of my time over in England's been spent at Manchester City, where I find myself today. So, yeah, that's kind of bringing you up to date as quickly as I can.
Excellent. So it's very interesting to hear about your journey and how you began your career and understand where you're at today. And in that process, Karen, I'm sure you've seen the women's game change, evolve. So, tell us a little bit about what you've seen since you started your career, where you're at today, and how you've seen the growth of women's football, like I said, evolve. What are some of those opportunities that you see in the future, and also some of the challenges that perhaps are facing the women's game?
Yeah, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the women's football is kind of made some great steps forward, and then it's made some great steps back at the same time. So my experience in the States was one that was always, everyone was like widely encouraged to kind of go and try and achieve, whatever their goals are, whatever they set out to do. But we always seem to kind of hit a bit of a ceiling at one point or another, whether that's, again, financially the league's not being well funded or sustainable. So again, the workforce kind of comes and goes where, players reach a certain age and that lifestyle is no longer something that will support, a family, and you reach a certain age and you're like, I can't really do this any longer. So you have to go and find another way to support yourself. So for a long time, I worked part-time as a coach. And if you go even further back, we had to pay to play to start. So if you look at it where it is today, we're fully professional at Manchester City, and the top league, the WSL1 in England, is all fully professional. So everyone is full-time. Everyone is training, and it's their job. So you've been able to see a reflection of that throughout the progress of the English national team as well. The league itself over here, I think, went from a league that was, in for lack of a better word, a bit of a joke, maybe 10, 15 years ago. No one really thought much about it, other than, people knew about Arsenal and how well that they were doing. But it's really, really rapidly developed. With the advent of, again, going full-time professional, having central contracts from the FA and the investment from the FA, that has really helped us turn a corner. But also, we've had to really challenge to change public perception of women's football in this country as well. And a massive stepping off point, a big platform for that was the Olympics in 2012. So, being able to be a part of that and being on the same, even keel as the men was a massive eye-opener to things that could potentially happen in the future if we got things right. So really striving for that equality is a big part of why I'd like to advocate for women's football and sport in the UK. So, we're slowly chipping away at this stereotype of women's athletes and women's football in this country. So I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. I think this league is quickly becoming, the envy of women's football all over the world. We're attracting a lot more foreign talent. The reputation is certainly growing, and I think, again, as you can see, that the national team is definitely benefiting from it. So if we could really nail down some of the financial woes, that's an area that I think we really have to invest in finding solutions for. We've had the good fortune of being backed by major clubs, as I say, the likes of Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, and so on. But there have been a lot of problems, of late. For instance, with the revamping and the rebranding of the WSL. We lost a few teams by the wayside, and Sunderland was a fortunate casualty of that rebranding, purely and simply based on how much importance an owner placed on having a women's team. So that was a bit disappointing, and it also shows that with an owner, everything can change in a heartbeat. And if a new owner comes in, he actually says, "Hey, I want a women's team." So if we could kind of find a way to make sure that women's football isn't the first thing to go if ownership changes hands, that would be a step in the right direction, I think.
Thanks for that, Karen. Just a slight follow on from that, and probably focusing a little bit more on the the performance aspects of women's football. In my role as a performance director at a number of clubs, I've seen the advent of sports science and how that has grown and become an integral part of the development of footballers. What has been what has grown tremendously over probably the last 10, 15 years is the area of mental support, psychological support. And I'm interested to find out if that level of support is available within the women's game, and also how you as an elite player prepare mentally for games and for major tournaments.
Yeah, I've realized that's a massive component of success, especially at elite levels. And it wasn't something that I necessarily understood until I had to go through some of it myself. So I've had some pretty severe injuries over the years, and having that the well-being side of it looked after was a massive part of my recovery and my progress throughout my career. So having sports psychologists available, say at our university, but also as we've progressed over the years throughout the clubs and specifically like the national team, that was where I was exposed to it, I think, the most. Working with our team liaison and our sports psychologist to England massively made a positive impression on my career, and I probably would pinpoint a lot of my success on the work that I did behind the scenes, off the pitch, in terms of my mental preparation, the understanding of myself and my needs, but then also the understanding of my teammates as well. So I think it's an integral part of being a professional athlete, because as much as you think that you can prepare for whatever might hit you on the pitch, you can never really understand completely about what to expect until you go through something like that. So whether it be injury, whether it be, a last minute penalty, to go through to the finals of a World Cup, or just dealing with things that you didn't really expect to happen. It's definitely an important piece to have in your puzzle when you're preparing. So in terms of my preparation, what I've really tried to focus on essentially is staying positive with yourself. I think because we are in such a well criticized, what would you say? Yeah, because football is so scrutinized. It's important to understand that you are not what everyone says you are, basically. Like, if you read a headline or if you see something, that doesn't necessarily define who you are. So you have to understand not only your strengths, but your weaknesses. And I think a lot of times people tend to listen to the noise, and that can have a negative effect on not only your performance, but your well-being, how you feel about yourself, your confidence, and so on. So, we did a lot of work at England about seeing big occasions, not as threats, but as opportunities to do well. And I think that's helped a lot of people really, seize the moment, as it were, and really understand that this is an opportunity for you to do something great. You don't need to see it as something to be afraid of. There's no reason to be fearful of it. It's just another opportunity to do what you do, go out and have fun, enjoy yourself, and try to play with that freedom and try to be relaxed. So that for me was probably the biggest shift, because I was always the first one to criticize myself. So that was a really important thing for me to understand. But when it comes to preparing again for a major tournament or a match, for me, I think I would just start by funneling, going from something really broad to something really narrow by the end of the week, or just building up to a tournament. So, it could be something where it's, we're going to play this opposition, these are their strengths, but let's focus on our strengths as well. And the closer you get to the match prep and the match day, you understand, like, okay, you just need a few little tweaks, but you really just need to trust the process that you've set out for yourself. So throughout the week, whether it's understanding, your relationship. So in my instance with back four, understanding, the opposition's press, those sorts of things. But then at the end of the day, the closer you get to match day, the more simple it gets. So that's kind of how I tend to prepare for the week. And a lot of reflection has actually helped in that process as well. So looking back at previous experiences, looking back at, weeks or matches, where I played really well. How did I play really well? What did I do to prepare? What was good about that? How can it be even better? Those are things that I kind of go back and rely on when I feel that I need something to really ground me.
Very interesting. Really interesting to hear and understand, from your perspective, how you prepare for such, matches and maintain the, as you said, the positive attitude and the strong mindset. Now, we talked about this last week, Karen. I was covering the Women's World Cup in 2015 in Canada, which I thought was a spectacular tournament, and England had a very strong performance, and unfortunately they came very close.
Yeah.
What leading up to the World Cup next year, which we have in France, 2019. First of all, how do you see England and the team, and more specifically yourself? How you were talking about how you prepare, but as we approach this major tournaments, can you give us a little bit of extra insight as to how you're getting ready for this major tournament, which we hope, of course, England have a very strong performance in?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, we have to qualify. So, we've got a few really important games coming up, and we need to get some vital points to top the group. So it's going to be tough, but first and foremost, that's the goal. We don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but based on my experiences in the 2011 and 2015 World Cup, I think overall, again, you have to start kind of really broad and then start to really narrow the focus. And it's for me, it was important to understand and identify what was in my control. And I think that's where you have to start first. So therefore, I kind of broke the main components down into sections. So for instance, it would be a physical, a tactical, a technical, would it be something psychological as well? So you're kind of hitting those corners. So, for me, I went straight to my weaknesses, just like I always do. I just go, right, what do I need to improve on the most? And so I'd look at my game, and I'd look at trends, things that maybe we were working on at club, and understanding how the position of goalkeeper has evolved specifically, and understanding, where have I gotten myself into trouble before, and how can I avoid that? A lot of that is based on, obviously, observations from matches, but then looking back at footage and analyzing that footage. So all in all, the best preparation for me is literally just going and thinking about, wouldn't it be great if I was better at this, and actually going, okay, how can I get better at that? And then really working hard, trying to say for instance, left foot, or whether it be if it's something in the physical department, robustness is kind of a word that's being thrown about at the minute. It's quite a buzzword. How do you become robust enough to sustain 6 games at a World Cup, 7 games at a World Cup, depending on how far you go and what the rules are, how many teams are involved these days. Can you sustain that load at that level for that long? So, what is that? What does that look like? Do you have weaknesses here, there? So those are the things that you can control, and by understanding that, you can kind of measure what you need to do in order to get there. So I think that was that really served as a reminder for me to kind of look at something I could put up in the changing room and go, yeah, okay, so from a physical perspective, I need to really look at a hamstring strength and kind of tick that off. So if I do that once or twice a week, or work on this program however many times a week and focus on the recovery, that I know that I'm doing the right thing. So that it not only does it serve as a reminder, it serves as a goal tree to kind of make sure that you're doing the right things. And it's something that you can keep yourself accountable to. So I think that really helps. As for other players, whether or not they do this, I think maybe they're a bit more in tune with their own bodies and their feelings. Maybe I just have a bit too much spare time on my hands. I'm not really sure, but this seems to work for me pretty well. So from a psychological standpoint, I think, again, going back to framing things in a positive way, looking back at opportunities and not living in the past. You want to understand that the game's moving on a lot since the last World Cup as well. So opposition will be different. I'm sure opponents will be looking at our game and understanding, what we did well, what we didn't do well, how we can expose that, what my tendencies are, if I'm fortunate enough to be playing at the time, what did I do well then, what can the opposition do to kind of catch me out, that sort of thing. So it's a two-way street, really, and I think but again, all we can really control is our own preparation. So just making sure that we're working hard day in and day out, on and off the pitch. It's essentially just leaving no stone unturned. But the closer you get to the tournament, again, you have to kind of rely on your preparation leading up to the tournament. But as soon as the tournament starts and everything kicks off, it's just almost a completely different game. Like, tournament football is just so different to anything else, really. It's just about getting through, group stages, getting into the next rounds, and it's about survival at the end of the day. Teams that maybe want to play pretty football or keep a lot of tidy possession at the edge of the box, they need to be clinical in the final third. So it's understanding about where you need to take your chances and where you need to be ruthless in front of goal, and being clever about where you play out, how you manage the clock. Like, there's a lot of things that kind of come into it, but at the end of the day, again, it's about what you can control. So it's your attitude, your work rate, your commitment to your teammates, and those sorts of things that get you through tournaments.
Thanks for that, Karen. As in any elite environment, I think particularly in the world of sport, to get to such a level where you can compete, as you've explained, consistently, you've got to develop certain characteristics within your nature. You've got to develop certain values, which may fit around teamwork, collaboration, discipline, etc., etc. Be keen to know how you as a person have developed through disciplining yourself to be an elite athlete, and how you feel some of those characteristics and some of those values are going to then transfer later on in life after you move into the next stage of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all very transferable. I can remember one of the best compliments I ever got was during my undergraduate degree at California State University, Fullerton. And I studied fine art there. I was working towards my graphic design degree. And one of the most notoriously tough professors came up to me during a critique, and he just basically just ripped my work to pieces in front of the whole class. And I just sat there and listened to him. I didn't argue with him. I asked a few questions and I took it on the chin. And I think after that class, he came up to me and he said, you athletes, you just seem to take criticism really well and move on. You don't, it's not no kind of emotional connection. You just deal with it, you listen, and then you move on. And I thought, like, that meant a lot to me, because this guy was tough. He was hard as nails. So he wasn't going to go easy on anybody. So that really meant a lot to me. And it was kind of then that I made that connection that it is what you learn in sport is so transferable into the real world, and especially the working business environment. So for me, being able to take feedback really well is a massively important part of what I do. I want to be the best. I want to constantly learn. I want to be challenged. I don't like kind of not moving forward, not progressing. So I'm always aching for feedback and criticism, because I want to know what I can do better. So I think that's one thing that you can really take into the workplace, because personally, I don't really think there's much point in doing anything if you don't want to continue to progress and excel. So I think a lot of employers would be very, very happy to have someone with a mindset like that, but then someone that's also willing to be very open, and be a good communicator and be a good listener, and understand what not only, say, your clients want, but what your superiors may want, but your coworkers for that matter as well. So resilience was a big one for me. Like I said, I've experienced a lot of injuries that have come at really unfortunate times, and I've fortunately been able to experience a lot of success despite these setbacks. But without that resilience, I wouldn't be able to pick myself up again and kind of say, yeah, all right, like, that's done. Let's move on from it. How can I use this as a learning opportunity? Because, if you quit at the first sign of trouble, I think that's not really very reassuring for anyone that's involved, really. So for me, unfortunately, I think failure is the best teacher, because it makes you learn very, very quickly, and you have to learn how to have a short memory. But it's also something that keeps you humble as well, I think, which is another great characteristic, I think, for people in the workplace, and that's, again, transferable into business. But I think probably one of my favorites in terms of things that I've picked up over the years has just been that reflection. I think you yourself are your best teacher. So if you decide to sit down and actually think things through critically, and think about situations where you could do something differently, and oh, that situation didn't go that well. I wonder why did it not go very well, and maybe if that happened again, I could do this a bit better, and kind of experiment with it and kind of test it out again if that situation ever did arise. And that was something for me that didn't come quite naturally. So I really had to sit down and kind of teach myself how to do it properly. And that was definitely a valuable tool. And I think that can be used in terms of, if you have board meetings, and there's going to be a lot of heated debates, when you get onto a board of several highly successful people, and even yourself as a manager of however many employees, you look at situations where you're not always going to get it right, and that's the reality of the situation. You're not always going to get it right, so you look back and you think, oh, how could I have done that better? How could I possibly have been more positive with so and so, or that wasn't the reaction I was hoping for. How can I change that if I have to do that again? So I think those are some really transferable techniques and things that can be applied. I think one other really valuable one was understanding yourself first. That's something I had to learn just recently. I you always think that you know exactly, how you're going to react in situations, or you think you know why you do things, but sometimes it's not until you see something put out on a piece of paper that you understand that, oh, maybe I'm not as good at that as I thought I was. So you have to kind of, really break yourself down and say, actually, that wasn't great. I need to be better at understanding myself before I can understand anyone else. So that's really helped me kind of mellow out a little bit in terms of like leading others, in terms of trying to build better relationships with people, because I understand, say for instance, if, I need a bit more energy to go and interact with some people, I need to go and get that for myself before I make a good impression on someone else. Or, I understand how sometimes I may come across as a bit loud or boisterous, and that might take people, aback. And I need to kind of put myself across in a different way because, I don't want to give people the wrong impression. So it's important to understand yourself before you can help others. And I think overall, listening is something that kind of often goes, I don't know, it just seems to kind of go by the wayside. A lot of people just sometimes speak for the sake of speaking it. And people don't always listen to understand. I think people listen sometimes to poke holes in arguments or find a loophole in some kind of conversation, whereas actually making a genuine connection can probably go a lot further. So listening has become a big skill, and something that in our team in particular, I think we're developing really nicely at the minute, because in those heated situations, if you can convey yourself well and concisely, but then you can also be surrounded by a team that's willing to take on and trust information that you're giving, I think you'll become much more successful and much more efficient. So in terms of teamwork, that's something that I'm living at the minute right now, because we've all got our individual roles to play, but none of them work if we don't work together. And that can go along with, which direction you choose to go. So, for me, I think myself, I'm very goal orientated. So I know that if I don't have a goal or something to strive for or to challenge myself with, I'll probably struggle a little bit. So I always try to find a coach or someone that can kind of help stimulate some thought to design a goal that is tough, but something that's achievable. So I always know that there's going to be some kind of progress, and that gives me purpose, and that's something that makes me want to get out of bed every day and go and work on something that's hard, So I think I'm rambling a bit here, but there are so many values and so many traits that are transferable from sport into business, and I think that's why so many professional athletes are so actively recruited post-career as well, because you display these traits, you display this resilience every single day. You're put through the ringer every single day, in the media, and if you can deal with that on a daily basis, I'd like to think that the business side of thing will come much more naturally as well.
Very interesting, Karen. As you were talking, I wrote down some notes here, and you're talking about resilience, dedication, being goal-oriented, self-awareness. So really interesting to take this all in, because I think all of us can resonate with what you're talking about. And in fact, it's a good lead up to the next question that we wanted to touch upon with you, which is, education. We know that you've given big priority to your education. You talked about your experience at Cal State Fullerton and obtaining your degree there. So that we know that this has been a very important part for you. So perhaps you can tell us about the role of education itself. I mean, a lot of the people that will be listening out tonight have, as you mentioned before, they have goals. They want to achieve certain objectives, whether it's in sports, whether it's in business, whether it's in the business of sports. So tell us a little bit about how education has helped you, and also what you feel could be some tips for those that are striving to achieve a goal and can perhaps be listening to you tonight.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Like, education has proved to be a pivotal part of my life and my career so far. I think first and foremost, before we even get started, it's because we realized that at some stage that women's professional football might not be something that, again, is sustainable. So we're always going to have a plan B. And then through my own personal experience with injuries, I was pretty close to that plan B more often than I'd like to admit. So it was always important for me to understand that I had something to fall back on just in case, because obviously there will come a point one day where we will have to call it a day on our professional sports careers. So it is something that's applicable to all at some point or another. And it frightens me sometimes that more people don't actually take that into consideration. And I do get concerned about people sometimes when they leave it a little too late, because it is a transition that you have to plan for. It is something that is not easy. And you have to admit to yourself and kind of work it in that one day you won't be able to, put your boots on or get your gloves on or whatever sport it is, pick up a racket, you're not going to be able to do that for the rest of your life. So what are you going to do when it comes to that day? What happens if it comes too soon? So that was the reason, I think, why I was so keen to make sure that I had an education. So going forward, education is about the acquisition of knowledge, first and foremost. So it doesn't need to be anything that's particularly formal. For me, what I've really learned about education is making sure that it's something that you're interested in. I don't think there's anything worse than being forced to sit in a classroom, learning about something that you really you're not bothered about. So making sure that it's something that you're interested in is pivotal. Secondly, that knowledge doesn't have to come from a textbook. It doesn't have to come from any sort of classroom. Everyone learns differently. Everyone consumes information differently, especially in this day and age. So for me, it was always easier to go to a university or to go to a class of some sort because of the social aspect of learning as well. I really enjoy learning from other people, and I really enjoy watching documentaries, listening to stories. I love listening to people speak about things that they're passionate about. But what I've really enjoyed about my education is being exposed to things that I would have never exposed myself to on my own. Whether that be through something challenging, something that I struggled through, or whether that be to understand something that I had no previous knowledge of existing before. So, the realm that I'll be entering post football is something very foreign to me in terms of the administrative side or the business side. So, learning practically is something that I think works very well for me, because it exposes you to very difficult, heated situations, and challenging yourself in that type of environment is something that you'll never forget. So, if you can all recall an experience where you're literally thrown into the deep end, I'm sure you can all, remember it very vividly. So that's something I think works very well with me, because you have to kind of think on your feet and problem solve. So yeah, again, everyone learns in different ways, but it it's just I can't put enough emphasis on how important it is, I think, to really to value it and to actually think critically about what you're interested in after football or after whatever professional sport it is that you're playing.
Excellent, Karen. Well, we really enjoyed having you, come on and tell us about your experience and talk about so many different subjects. And, you just touched upon life after football and the importance of education. And I think, these are important points that we can all take away from what you've shared with us tonight. So again, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us tonight. So I know we had planned to talk a little bit more about life after football, but I think we've covered it already in the question beforehand. So I think at this stage what we'll do is we'll let our audience think of a few questions and start thinking about anything that you'd like to ask Karen. It's not every day that we have the opportunity to have an elite athlete on these types of sessions. So take advantage, think of some questions. And while you do that, we're going to run through a couple of points about our certificate in football business and management online program that is starting in October. So while you're thinking of a few questions, we'll talk a little bit about this program for those that may be interested in knowing more about it. This is a program that we run in partnership between the Sports Business Institute Barcelona and BSI. And it starts in October 2018. I'll talk briefly about the overview of the program itself. So it's an online program, so you can do it from anywhere in the world. The language is in English, and it begins October 22nd. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it also includes a corporate football tour in Barcelona. So when you finish the program, you have 2 days where you come to Barcelona and we take you to see FC Barcelona from the inside, Espanyol, and a couple of the other major sports organizations in the city. So it's an online program, but you do have a chance to come to Barcelona. It's an optional visit. And this year we also have an additional bonus, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But I'd also like to talk about the recognition and the certificate and how it came about. So at this stage, perhaps Tony is in a better position to talk about this point, Tony, about the recognition that we have from the Center for Sports Business. So, Tony, if you want to touch upon that.
I think it's important just to stay there and touch on what Karen said there. There are multiple different ways in which people learn. We all have our different preferences, and the way the program is designed is to provide you with the opportunity to engage and develop your knowledge, but around very current and contemporary issues that support the business of football. So it's an industry recognised programme, and at the University of Salford they have what's called an industry collaboration zone, where their main purpose is to work with or collaborate with sport and business, so that all learnings are real and all learnings are there to impact your performance. So it's not a qualification from the University of Salford, but it's recognised by the industry collaboration zone that operates in both the world of sport and business through Salford and through various organisations in football.
Right, and then just touching upon briefly, you can obviously find out more information on our website, but I'll just briefly talk about some of the modules that we cover. So we look at the entire business of football, looking at it from an angle of marketing and sponsorship, club operations, stadium management, financial management. This is term 1 from October till Christmas. Term 2, we turn it over to digital business management in football, CRM, data analytics, fan engagement, media, communications, etc., as well as emerging markets in football. So this is from January till the Easter break. And then finally, in term 3, we continue on with other subjects such as performance management, football, human resources, and career management. Women's football, which we've highlighted here because, of course, it's one of the topics that is very relevant and that is included in the program, as well as other topics that you see here, sports law, player representation, etc., with a final project and leading up to the 2 days in Barcelona. We won't go much into the methodology tonight because, like I said, if any of you are interested, you can get in touch with us. But essentially, it's an online program that has a live weekly seminar with a top football industry executive, be it from a club, a federation, a sports brand, organization, etc. So each week you have someone from the industry talk to you. So Tony was mentioning before that it is industry recognized, and the reason it's industry recognized is because it's a program that is put together by industry professionals with real live cases. And then obviously you have the opportunity to do assignments, work in groups, and culminate the program in Barcelona with the 2-day visit. As far as the structure and how it works, well, like I said, it runs from October till June, and each Monday there's new content uploaded to the online campus, and Thursdays we have the live sessions with the industry professionals. Now, what does it include? Like we said, you have these top industry executives come and share their knowledge, share their cases with you live. These are people that are working for clubs such as Manchester City, Arsenal, CONCACAF, many other clubs and federations and brands such as Adidas. So you get top professionals come and share their expertise with you. So in that sense, you have an opportunity to read what's happening in the industry today. You also have a mentorship program where you have the opportunity to, understand where you're at now and where you want to go. And we, together with you, we build a path for you. We build an action plan that is based on your aspirations, that caters to your strengths, and also looking at what the market needs in the football industry today. So obviously we help you to create a personal brand, to amplify your network, and to guide you along your way so that it's not a program that you complete and then you're looking for what to do, but rather that from day one you are having the mentorship and the guidance from industry professionals that can optimize your opportunities moving forward. This is just a couple of testimonials, and we have Nathaniel Shalaba, the professional football player for Watford FC and the English national team. He completed the program last year. So this is essentially just to show that it's a program that attracts very senior and high-level professionals from the football industry, whether they're players such as Nathaniel or executives that are working in the business of football and the business of sport. So if you're not in that industry already, it does provide an opportunity to network and learn from your classmates that many of them, like I said, have very extensive experience in football. We also provide internship opportunities. So we have the opportunities of having placements across the different organizations that we have across our network. So you're going to be in a position where it's not just going to be about knowledge, but it's also going to be about putting that knowledge into practice and being able to have the opportunity to amplify your experience in the program by doing an internship if you choose to do that. So, like I said, if you have more questions or want to know more, let us know. The last thing that I'll share here, a couple of last points is, when you apply for this program, which begins in October, you get a pass to the World Football Summit. For those of you that are not familiar with the World Football Summit, it's an event in Madrid that has been running for 3 years now, and it's become one of the leading congresses for the football industry. It is co-sponsored by La Liga, so you have the opportunity to meet and network with many industry professionals, and of course, you're part of the SBI VSI delegation, so we're there to provide all the support and guide you through this conference. And like I said at the outset, then we culminate the course with a 2-day event in Barcelona, the Barcelona Corporate Football Tour and a graduation dinner. We've been featured in the media such as FC Business. So again, if you want to know more information, go to our website at sbibarcelona.com. Click on the enroll now option if you want more information on how to enroll and how to secure a spot. And if you'd like more information about the program itself and want to speak to someone from our team, simply fill in the contact form and we'll be happy to set up an interview with you to understand better where you're at and what are your aspirations in football. So that's it about the program. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of time to think of some questions for Karen. And of course, if you have any questions about the program itself, feel free to let us know. So let me go through some of these questions in the chat, Karen. And we have a question from Jorge. And let me read it out here. He says he's been a women's coach for a while, and one of his main points is to have a very good connection with players. As me, being a man, I've put a lot of effort to understand female footballers. My question to Karen is, how important is it for her that the relation with the coach, whether it's your club or your national team coaches, is it something that she sees, they are male, is it something that she sees as very important? Or as long as the coach knows what to do in football, it's not important and the relationship, can work? So, interesting question from Jorge. Karen.
Very interesting question. I think first and foremost, if you're dealing with elite athletes, their number one priority is always going to be the sport. In my own personal experience, if you can back up any decision that you make or any comment that you make with a football reason, people can accept that, so if you make a critical decision or a critical comment, but you give a very valid reason based on tactics or based on a football decision, I think you'll always get the backing of the players and the understanding of the players. However, that said, building relationships is an incredibly important part of any industry or any personal interaction. It's always a lot easier to take criticism from people that you trust, and by building trust, you only really get there if you speak honestly and openly about what it is that you're thinking, seeing, feeling. Again, it does come back to having those football reasons. So building relationships, I think, with players, it is probably more important in the women's game than it probably is in the men's game. I can't speak to what it's like in the men's game, but I imagine you could pretty much say anything to any lads and they'll get annoyed, but then they'll probably just get on with it. Whereas sometimes in the women's game, I think it's not that you have to be careful, it's just that you can lose trust relatively quickly, I think, if someone's seen to be devious or malintentioned, I think. So I think the relationship is particularly important. I think it is important to make an effort to try to understand your players and understand the people that you're working with and how they like to receive information. What the best way to approach a certain individual is if you have a certain message. Some people, the message might land better if you're giving them a hard time and you make a comment in a brash, boisterous way, or some people might need an arm around the shoulder. So it's imperative to understand who you're dealing with, and you can only really build that by observation and by, again, understanding yourself, but then understanding those people as well. So but yeah, first and foremost, I think everything has to be revolving around a football decision or a sports decision.
Interesting. Very, very good question, Jorge, and thank you, Karen, for the answer. We have another question from Mandy, and thanks for your question, Mandy. She says, from a developmental perspective, with the growth of the women's game in England, where do you feel the future of the game is going, especially in comparison to the US and the different approaches in development?
That's another really good question. I think I get this one probably most often. In terms of the development of the game in the UK, I think a lot of it stems around the tactical understanding of football, because it's so highly ingrained in the culture, but also the technical understanding and the technical ability of the players, where I think in my personal experience in the States, the physical aspect is the first thing to be developed, and then the technical, and then the tactical. So that's quite interesting. So if I look across, going years back, the US was always at the peak of international football, and they were always dominant, and that lasted a very long time, and they are still very much at the top. But it's amazing how quickly the gap is closed with the advent of professionalizing the game over in this country and throughout the rest of Europe, by having players travel abroad and experience different styles of play and be exposed to new schools of thought, and new techniques, new tactical understandings. They can bring that back to their home nations when they go away and play competitively. They develop their game very quickly, because we're fully ingrained in the game every single day. Football's always on in England somewhere in some form or another, so you're always there to consume it. But then the conversations are just different as well. Lots of people constantly asking questions. You're challenging thought about, tactics. You got match of the day on every single day. So there's constantly like a football education, which I think it's getting a lot better in the States, but it definitely, I think, can improve, and hopefully it will improve much quicker. But regarding the future of the game, I think hopefully, if things continue the way they are, I think it's only gonna ascend, really. You take the under 20s Women's World Cup at the minute in France, and I've been very, very impressed with England so far. But also, the technical ability of the likes of Brazil, Mexico, the US, Japan. There's been some very, very good young talent on stage, and I've been very, very impressed with the future of the game. So, do get worried at times about the professionalism in terms of the professionalization, I should say, of the sport. Is it going to go the same way as kind of the men's did, where you developed some fantastic young players, but a lot of players get kind of lost along the way, and how do we have an opportunity to develop women's football, I think, in this country, and really influence it as players, that is very unique to professional sport. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue shaping that going forward. But I expect a lot of great things coming from the future footballers in the UK and in Europe. I think we've got some great talent.
Excellent. So thanks for that question. So maybe we'll take one or two more questions. And we have one, this is interesting. Alex from Mexico, he says, based on what happened in the last World Cup in Russia in terms of technology, and such as the VAR or the VAR, the video assisted referee, and digital engagement increasement, do you think the next Women's World Cup is ready to implement this technology? And what are your thoughts about this?
That's interesting. I don't see why it wouldn't be. You know, if it's good enough for the men, I don't see why it wouldn't be good enough for the women. In terms of goal line technology, that's something that I hope is integrated into the next World Cup as well. Because I've seen a lot of strange situations over my career, and it would be great if it was if it was cleared up, especially in a major tournament. So, in terms of the video assisted referee system, I think it's something that would certainly benefit. The women's game would certainly benefit from, because a lot of people might not like me saying this, but a lot of decisions have been questionable at times. You know, I think it would be interesting if everyone could experience like the meetings before a tournament starts, about when the referees come in and speak to the teams about which particular rules will probably be more enforceable than others, and those sorts of things. If people knew that, then they probably wouldn't question as many decisions. But I guess not everyone can be privy to that kind of knowledge before a major tournament. But I don't see why it shouldn't be something that should be available to the 2019 Women's World Cup. If we're talking about parity, I think it certainly should be. So that's probably one that FIFA is going to be left debating. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all saw that it's been a learning experience at for the Men's World Cup, but it'd be nice to see in the Women's World Cup too in 2019. So great question. So interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Maybe we'll take one final question, and it's coming in from Rian. And let me just read it off here. She says, it is inevitable that the top women's teams in the UK and Europe will mirror the top men's team, due to financial support, and successful teams of the past, such as Sunderland, Doncaster, etc., will always be lower tier. So do you think that could be, I guess, will the lower teams or the teams of the past, such as Sunderland and Doncaster, will always be lower tier?
That's quite a big loaded question there, I think. To be honest, I think we're only really limited by our own imagination, as cheesy as that sounds. Yes, there is a lot of social backing from the club's higher, up in terms of the hierarchy, if you want to call it that, in terms of financial status and support. But if you really dig deep into the governance of the league itself, there are salary caps that come into it. So there won't be, let's just say the gaps are smaller than they probably are in the men's game, in terms of, you've got the lower division teams, and then you've got the higher division teams, and their accessibility to funds, I suppose, and resources. So it's a really good question, because I think the games are just very different. They're from very different times, and they're difficult to compare to where it is currently. But Sunderland, they have all, it just kind of depends on the situation that I read about anyway, was based on an owner's opinion, and whether or not he chose, or the new owner chooses to invest. So I don't know if it's necessarily the depth of the pockets, more of the attitudes towards the women's game in general. So perhaps that's something that we should try and address before we try and address the financial disparities between the clubs.
Yeah, interesting. Excellent. Well, at this stage, we'd like to thank all of you guys for your questions and for being here tonight. And we'll evidently like to thank Karen, because we've learned a lot tonight, Karen, based on what you had to share with us. We gained very valuable insights. And we just take this opportunity to thank you once again for coming on and speaking to us and sharing with us your path to success and many of the other subjects that you've touched upon tonight, which provide us with very valuable, like I said, valuable insight that we take away from tonight. At this stage, I'll turn it over to Tony, who we've seemed to have lost his camera. But Tony, I'll turn it over to you for the final word tonight as we say goodbye to Karen. So over to you, Tony.
I think what you've delivered tonight has been a very insightful piece around the women's game, also from an elite athlete, and how you've disciplined yourself to be able to sustain your career for a long time. But interestingly as well, how you have from my perspective, a much broader outlook online, what you can take into other areas of your life from the world of professional football. So thanks for your insights, really enjoyable, and I hope the rest of you guys who were listening have an enjoyable hour as well.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks once again, Karen, and thanks to all of you. For those that may be listening to this recording, it will be available soon. So once again, thanks everybody. Thanks, Karen. And talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
Bye.